Well, it's great to welcome to the Armchair Select doping expert Nicki Vance in Sydney. The issues regarding Lance Armstrong have been a key issue in sports recently, and we thought it'd be time and timely to sit back and talk to an expert in the field just to unpack some of the issues. Nicki Vance, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Can we just go into how you got into the field of anti-doping? It's a very specialised field, isn't it?
Look, it is, yes. I really, though, just fell into it back in 1989. I was a physical education teacher looking to change into sports administration and was offered the opportunity to work as for 5 months, actually was my original job offer, as the first full-time drug testing officer for the precursor to actually ASDA. It was actually pre-ASDA time,
right.
Coming out of the Ben Johnson case. The Australians also had an investigation and came up with some extra funding for the job that I did and for the establishment of the Australian Sports Drug Agency.
Wonderful. How does anti-doping work? Just explain in a layperson's terms to we fans, how does the anti-doping testing framework work around the world for people of Armstrong's ilk, but also for cricketers and professional footballers?
Sure. Look, the World Anti-Doping Agency was established in sort of 99-2000. And let's talk about it from then, because that is the current sort of situation. It was very different before that, and we might come to that later. But
sure.
But look, the World Anti-Doping Agency, once it was established, the imprimatur by the sport, for the first time, sport governments really working together, and with that support, then established what was called the World Anti-Doping, with the initial key role to establish what is called the World Anti-Doping Code, which they took a couple of years to do. Of course, a big document and a lot of discussion. and the code is what then all of the sporting organisations and governments have been asked to sign on to. Sport could do that relatively easily, as primarily non-governmental organisations. They have their own independence.
Yep.
It took the governments a little bit longer. They had to come up with a tool through the United Nations to give them the ability to sign on to a private document.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more complicated, but the basic principles were that the World Anti-Doping Code was established, and then various sporting organisations, including major games organisers, then asked to sign up.
Okay.
To the World Anti-Doping Code and everything that comes under the World Anti-Doping Code.
Okay. In terms of, let's, if we can, turn our attention to the Armstrong case. There's been a lot of reporting in the media in the last couple of weeks since this issue broke. Can you maybe unpack what the report from the US authorities was, how it relates to Armstrong, and some of the implications that have really kind of, seen people in Australia even lose their jobs in the last couple of weeks? Sure.
Look, now, USADA took on the Lance Armstrong case,
right,
and some of his colleagues, of course, but it was really centred around Lance Armstrong. After what I understand, the government of the US actually dropped the same case that they were originally looking into and found. But the US, you might recall with Marion Jones and a couple of the other cases where the US, actually the governmental authorities, absolutely established grand juries to investigate this issue. Now, my understanding is that is exactly what was happening with Lance Armstrong. And I must say, if we relate to WADA and the code and everything, US really only got serious after the establishment of the World Anti-Doping Code and the establishment of the US Anti-Doping Agency, or USADA. Before 2000, US really were not really paying serious attention to the world of anti-doping.
Right.
Okay, we haven't probably got long to talk about that now, but,
no.
but that's a bit of background there. So USADA picked up the case where I understand the US authorities, for whatever political reasons, had dropped it.
Yep.
And continued the investigation themselves, looking into the past, looking into the role of the various cycling authorities and professional teams, and came up with this evidence through interviews and so forth, and enough to result in what's happened today with people falling around us like ninepins. I mean, just today we've heard that Vice President of Australian Cycling has resigned, Stephen Hodge, a former professional. So it's certainly the start I think, of the undoing, let's say, of the cheating in cycling, and it's a long time coming.
Right.
It's been far too long to get to this stage. It's been very frustrating for the last 20 years seeing this issue.
Yep.
So I'm delighted that USADA have taken it on and have got to the stage they're at. I'm just sorry it's taken this long to get here.
What will be the legacy of the Lance Armstrong case in terms of, and in your opinion, not necessarily to do with the sport per se, but what are some of the implications that come out of the way that USADA have gone after this drug issue, and what does it mean for cycling, I guess, in terms of your experience?
Well, I guess to me, it's sad to see that cycling and cyclists have come to this stage, for like 20 years of taking drugs. And I do believe that a number of these younger cyclists, get into the sport, glossy-eyed, all keen to. That's why I'm involved in this area, and have been then misled by professional cheats, let's call them. I mean, it doesn't matter. You've got the athletes, the entourage. You're talking about the whole, you do not get that level of sophistication without a whole lot of support. It's not the athlete. Okay, now the athlete themselves have to take some responsibility, but I'm certainly not going to judge young athletes led astray. They'll either they would have either had to leave the sport together, which some of them did, or got dragged along with it. I do feel then that is the responsibility of their countries and the International Cycling Federation,
right, who
have let them down.
Okay.
So I believe really UCI has now absolutely faced with this information that they cannot ignore.
Yep.
They have over many years, particularly before 2000. And I've even gone back onto some papers I've wrote myself and presented to them to take sanctions seriously, asking them to introduce out of competition testing, which they didn't have at the time.
Yeah.
But since WADA and in the last 10 years, I guess there's been more pressure on cycling to do a bit more. I think it really was another Australian woman, Anne Gripper, who was in charge of anti-doping at UCI, and a good friend and colleague of mine.
Yeah.
That when she went there, I thought, wow, finally UCI have taken something seriously, because there's no question about her credibility.
Right.
But coming to USADA now, we still have to wait for UCI's actual response.
Right.
It will be up to the UCI. I understand they have the 21 days, so we've now got 2 more weeks from this point in time for their actual formal response. And let us hope that they will take on board the fact that they do need to remove the Tour de France wins from Lance Armstrong and address absolute culture of cheating in their sport. So I think Lance just epitomises that terrible culture that they have allowed to develop in their sport. And really, while they have made some moves in the last 5 years with a biological passport and doing a certain number of things that really are very positive and very good to see, I still think there's an underlying culture that they have to address.
Where to from here overall with sports? I mean, we're here in Australia. The AFL has a drug testing regime. How do the major sports in Australia face some of these issues?
Well, no, that's right. I think that one of the positive things, though, that if we do say back in even pre-2000, so it didn't take WADA for Australia to address this issue very seriously. In the fact that we established an agency back in 90 and 91 really was really getting formalised. And since then, the change into the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority. So ASADA is a development, with additional powers.
Yep.
That the country's leading the way in that sense. Now, it doesn't mean that there's still a lot to do, and I think at times we can be a bit blasé, we can be a bit naive and a bit parochial about our athletes, and pretty good at pointing the finger at others.
Yeah.
But needless to say, we have adapted with the World Anti-Doping Code, adding what I would call tools to our anti-doping tool bag. So in the past, it was always collecting a urine sample and sending it to a laboratory and finding what was in the urine sample.
Oh,
We
okay.
now have additional powers, such as investigations, and you'll see with the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority, where they have a number of cases, and they have in the last couple of years, where they've prosecuted athletes who have been caught bringing drugs into the country, have been caught with drugs in their possession. So it's not just a matter of finding a urine sample positive, and that's important.
Yeah.
It is also it has been important with the addition of some of the policies of the World Anti-Doping Code, followed by ASADA and all the other countries, to try to map exactly where athletes are. The term whereabouts is a bit of a jargon term, but it's basically meaning that we need to know where athletes are at every day, that the elite athletes, we have to know where they are for 1 hour every day to be able to track them down and test them out of competition. Now, this is was an important development. When I started, we used to ring the athletes up and bring them in the next day for a test, and we progressively have had to add and tighten up the policies because some athletes cheated.
Right.
So
okay.
this has been an evolving world of the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I still believe that most of the time, most athletes abide by what we add. So, we've started out of competition testing. That would have deterred a lot of athletes. The real cheats continued. Okay. We then had to add, no notice testing. The real cheats continue.
Yeah.
We've now got a situation where this 1 hour whereabouts and reported in the USADA papers, referring to Lance Armstrong, where regardless of needing that 1 hour, they were able to then work around that by disappearing the rest of the time, not being available, starting to do microdosing. So I believe we now absolutely have to look at the situation where, whether it's 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever you want it to be, that we know where certain athletes are. Now, we certainly don't want to be doing that for all athletes. I already think that the 1 hour whereabouts is far too much and too onerous on sports who really do not have a problem, a significant problem. So there's a big, enormous administration and money and resources that goes into the management of that. So we must be more refined about how we use the resources. The sports that have a problem like cycling need to do a hell of a lot more than tiddlywinks. Yeah.
In one or two sentences, a sad thing for cycling with a champion in inverted commas having been found out, but a good thing for the sport overall. Look,
I think anti-doping is one of those things we wish never. Doping, that was one of those we wish never existed, but it does. I mean, sport is basically, it comes about in a whole range of ways: professional sport, amateur sport, participation. So when we talk about sport, we are talking about a lot of different wide spectrum. I think that with the amount of money in sport and I guess the human condition of some people to want to be on top regardless of whatever they do, we do have to stay on top of this issue, and unfortunately it's there. So it is sad. It's sad that with Lance and what he's done, the Ben Johnsons, I mean, some of these guys probably would have won what they were trying to achieve anyway without drugs, and they've made those decisions. I think it's sad, but for now I think we really have to take it very seriously and try and change the culture so that the young athletes growing up today are not faced with the same issues.
Great. Nicki Vance, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. Lots of insights, and as I said before at the start of our chat, a key issue with Armstrong, and really do appreciate your expert insights from Sydney this afternoon.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think it's not the last we'll hear of it in the next few weeks, so we'll be interested to see
we'll be in touch.
What happens. Yeah, that's for sure. Thanks.
Thank you for your time, Nicki.
Bye for now.